And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
All right, Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast. I'm Russell Brown. Christian Page joining me as well. CP, how are we doing on this 2nd of January 2020, the new year, new show, whole new us?
That's right. Happy New Year, and getting excited because now we are in the month of the Senior Bowl and all the other college bowl games. And, of course, NFL playoffs, got the national championship in the college football playoffs in full swing. This is a really fun time of year.
It really is, and it's a great time at Cover One. I mean, we just got our Senior Bowl credentials today, so we will officially be going down there in 3-4 weeks. We've got 2 new additions to the staff with Zach Hicks of Stampede Blue, which is for the Colts SB Nation site, and Zach is a terrific follow on Twitter. And then we've got Brad Kelly coming back and joining us. Both these guys will be joining us to do NFL draft content. They're not on the show tonight, but maybe down the line we can get them on with us, or just with me, or just with you, or whatever, and we can pick their brain of their evaluation process and really where they're at with specific players, especially Brad with wide receivers. He's a terrific follow for just that in itself. But yeah, I mean, we've got a ton of stuff going on, and we just were talking about it before the show and kind of what we wanted to do today. And the college football playoff is come and gone, and we've got a national championship game that we'll preview next week. Clemson and LSU is going to be a fun one. We'll obviously have some players there, but really the game that stood out, and I guess we could talk about the LSU-Oklahoma debacle, but and I guess we'll start there. Oklahoma got decimated, absolutely destroyed. And I mean, really the bright spot, I guess you could say, was like Kenneth Murray, and you could say Creed Humphrey, and you could say CeeDee Lamb. But realistically speaking, they just were no match whatsoever for Joe Burrow and LSU. So, I mean, out of this game, what does it do for the draft stock of Joe Burrow and really anybody else?
Can it get any higher? I mean, really, can Joe Burrow's stock get any higher? I mean, I know he's kind of battling there with guys like Derek Brown and Chase Young, who have been at the top of their game from week 1 to where they are now. But Joe Burrow continues. I mean, 7 touchdowns, 8 total touchdowns, just shy of 500 yards. It's incredible what he's doing right now. And he's doing it just so smoothly. It's not like it's, running away and having some circus plays. Though he did have a couple in this game. I'm not going to dismiss that at all. But he just looks so calm and so confident in his ability. And that's something we talked about week 1. And I jokingly said, hey, it was Georgia Southern that they were playing, but there was something about Joe Burrow's game and mentality that just made him look so much more comfortable and confident in his overall ability. And he keeps showing that every week. It doesn't matter who they're playing. I know Oklahoma, they're a very pedestrian defense, but they can put up a lot of points. LSU's defense down the stretch has played a lot better, a lot more consistent. Getting some guys healthy, like Grant Delpit being one of those. But I think it was just from an overall college football standpoint. I think winning this game handedly without Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's had an incredible season, the running back for LSU, I think says a lot about Joe Brady and Steve Ensminger on the offensive end, the play callers, what LSU is really capable of. Because I'm not saying Edwards-Helaire is just a system guy or whatever it may be. He's not worth all the hype he's getting. No, he's definitely a top 10 running back in this 2020 class. But I definitely think just the versatility and just the innovation in this offense, it's hard to stop LSU, but I think their next opponent's going to give them everything they can handle, and we'll get there in a second. But Isaiah Simmons is definitely the X factor when they face Clemson.
Yeah, no, for sure. He really is. He's going to be he's the most versatile player in the class, and I think Isaiah Simmons put that on display against Ohio State. But just with Joe Burrow real fast is, I mean, this guy came out of nowhere. Nobody expected this. We've talked about it so many times on this show, and he makes every single throw. Now, I think on a couple of deep balls, he'll underthrow a touch here and there, but realistically speaking, he makes every single throw. He's accurate with every single throw. He maneuvers in and out of the pocket. He has pretty much everything that you're looking for in a franchise signal caller at the next level. And I think at this point, the real question is he the top player in this class? Is he the top player in the 2020 NFL draft? Not taking anything away from Chase Young, but Joe Burrow is just doing something I've never seen. I don't know if we'll ever see it again. And if we do, obviously it won't be for a while. And he's doing something that I don't think's ever been done before. And I mean, I think it has to be a discussion at this point in time. Maybe a few weeks back, not so much. Chase Young was clearly the best player in college football, but Joe Burrow is the best player in college football. The Heisman speaks that. The way he's playing for LSU speaks that. And at this point, I just think we have to start discussing from the draft, is he the top player on draft boards everywhere? Should he be?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like you said, when you try to poke holes in his game, you can't. I mean, and I know this is kind of a hard comparison because of the positional value of the quarterback, but you take, just from a values perspective, you take Joe Burrow off this LSU team, where are they? If you take Chase Young off Ohio State, where are they? And I think you say LSU, they're not going to – I mean, they may be 9-3 and still be a good football team, but they're not going to be anywhere to the caliber they are now. Chase Young, you take him out for a few games, which we saw Ohio State was still doing what they were doing. Maybe they weren't as dominant in the trenches, but I think if you're just kind of from a comparable value perspective, I think you tilt your hand to Joe Burrow. And, of course, just being a quarterback and the impact you can really add immediately to a team that really yearns for that quarterback with the Cincinnati Bengals. If they were to go with the number one overall player in this class, I think it would be Joe Burrow, because the guy continues to just be that dominant, and he just is not missing a beat. And you're just seeing this ascension every single week, year by year as well. And if you continue to see that ascension, of course, he's going to drop a little bit just based on style of play in the league, but you just have to love and fall in love with the potential. But it is kind of splitting hairs, even though Joe Burrow has been the most dominant player in football this year. It is splitting hairs with those two guys.
Yeah, it's almost like a 1A, 1B type thing, and you go from 1A to 1B to 3. You don't even worry about anything else. And I'm putting together my big board, and I'm putting guys in places, and CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. I have a tough time separating the two because they're so good. And then the running backs, we've talked about it before. Where do you rank guys like Travis Etienne and J.K. Dobbins and DeAndre Swift and Jonathan Taylor? How do you rank those four guys? And then you have a guy like Zach Moss, and then you have a guy like LaMichael Pirine, who we'll talk about in a few minutes. But it's like, where do you start ranking these guys? Because it's so close, in my personal opinion. And then, obviously just between Burrow and Young, clearly they're the top players at their position, but it's close, I think, at 1 and 2. And I'm really starting to lean that way of Joe Burrow being my top player on my board and just sticking to that. And nothing against Chase Young, but that's just where it's going to be. And their grades are so close. I don't want to reveal, because I'm putting a post together, so I don't want to reveal anything shocking or disappointing, but I do have a big board dropping probably next Monday, so I'm excited to do that. But moving to the next game, that was Ohio State and Clemson, which was a very good football game. A couple of questionable calls for the traditional football fan out there, but it is what it is. It was part of the game, and that's part of football now is, guys like Shaun Wade, you can't come in and lead with your head like that, but he ended up doing that. So what was your take on this game? Obviously, J.K. Dobbins, a player that just is so damn good, so electric when he has the ball in his hands. He's not like an electric runner, but he's just so consistent. The vision is just remarkable. And, I guess really, who was the biggest standout from this game from a draft perspective? And maybe it is your guy, Isaiah Simmons.
Yeah, there's a ton. It's hard to just pick one. You talked about Dobbins, who, struggled or had an ankle injury, and he came back and you saw him slip a little bit. And then, he had to be kind of helped off the field because he just made one cut on no contact. but he comes back, runs for 174 yards, puts his team in position to win. Also showed his ability in the receiving game. I know he dropped that one crucial swing pass where he had nothing but green in front of him, which could have changed the whole game. But overall, I think Dobbins is a very consistent wide receiver receiver in that regard as far as running backs go. And then the other running back for Clemson, Travis Etienne. I know you posted a couple videos about him when he, just his accelerator. I mean, that might be his, I guess, over elite quality compared to all these other running backs, because when he puts his foot in the ground, he is gone. And I know he has a little bit, he almost struggles with, I guess, different gears in the sake of, see if I can explain this right, of stopping and then starting again, because I think he can get a little clumsy on his feet. It seems like he runs a little heavy with his feet sometimes, but in this case, it didn't really matter because he just hit the hole and he was gone pretty much untouched. So he showed a little bit of receiving ability as well. Also, running for 36 yards and just 10 carries. But I think Isaiah Simmons, the multitude of positions that the guy lines up for, like, I don't know what to call him. I'm just saying Isaiah Simmons, the defender. Like, that's the movie title.
Yeah.
And like starring linebacker, slot cornerback, safety, rover, buck defensive end. Like, it's all of it. And he plays each one at an elite level. And that's sometimes a knock on a scouting report where you're like, oh, he plays, you can kind of put him anywhere, he can play whatever. Sometimes that means, like, I don't know, because he's kind of a jack of all trades and I don't know where to line him up. That's not the case for Isaiah Simmons, because he plays every single position he lines up at an elite level. And I think that definitely puts him in the top 10 discussion as far as just overall players on the board and possibly the selection.
Yeah. The single high safety look that he did with the interception was incredible. And the range, the ability to track that football, make that interception. I mean, I'm going to list him as a linebacker because I think traditionally he's going to play more up in the box than he will as a safety, especially like as a single high safety. But I still think just that versatility is something that teams will covet in the top 10 and probably with even in the top 7 of defenses. And, an interesting team to me that I continue to go back to is, and I don't want to go like full-blown mock draft here, but number 6, the LA Chargers. I know they need a quarterback. And I think that they could be in a position to, depending on what happens with Tua and his decision, and we'll get a prediction probably near the end of the show on that. But, depending on what goes on there, if he goes pro, maybe Miami will push up the board and try to get Tua. But at the same time, if he doesn't go, then there's kind of this market, I would say, for Justin Herbert. And I think Miami and the Chargers are the two teams at 5 and 6 that make the most sense. But if the Chargers are still invested in Phillip Rivers for one more year, I think Isaiah Simmons, I know they need offensive line help. I know they need to get, their offensive tackles in position, and they need to get that situated. But I think Isaiah Simmons in that defense with Derwin James would be unbelievable, especially with the 2 edge rushers. And you got Melvin Ingram, you've got Joey Bosa. You add a guy like Derwin James 2 years or last year, what was it? Last year, 2 years ago, last year, 2 years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And you added him 2 years ago. And then you have a guy like Isaiah Simmons. If you can add those 2 guys, I just feel like that is something that other teams will not have. And you will have versatility all over the field, range of guys that just, it's incredible. I think he's certainly a top 10 player. I'm excited to see where he goes in the draft. So I'm with you, though. I think, Dobbins, and I think you really hit the nail on the head with Travis Etienne. And I think that's something that his ability to change into that, I guess that 3rd gear or 4th gear or whatever you want to call it, and just go, and that explosiveness, off his feet is incredible. But there are times that he looks, I don't want to say lackadaisical, but he does, and he has a hard time getting, switching those gears. And I think that prevents him from really being like that elite guy and changing his direction. And I think that that's something that hurts him a little bit. But he's a guy that might get lost in the shuffle, to be honest, and then end up being the best back out of the entire group. And I mean, that's no discredit to him or anything, but that's kind of where I'm at with him, because I'm lost on the shuffle with him because I've fallen in love with a guy like J.K. Dobbins, and I love Zach Moss, and then DeAndre Swift's kind of the same way. And I'm honestly I'm a little bit worried about like kind of where's his frame at? Is that why he was dinged up, and or was it just, playing through injuries? And then, you got a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who I think is a complete back. I think he's a guy that can do a little bit of everything. So I really can't wait to get deeper and deeper into these running backs. And I think we could probably spend an entire show on just the running back position. And maybe that's something we'll do here in the coming weeks of just, talking briefly about each specific group and really diving deep. But I know you mentioned my guys before the show, and guys like Devin Duvernay and guys like Justin Jefferson and the list of guys. So I kind of want to get your spin on that. What was your take on those guys that you saw during the bowl games overall, from the, whether it be the Rose Bowl or whether it be the Orange Bowl or the Cotton Bowl or whatever it might be? What was your spin on some of those games and some of those players? And did you like what you see?
Oh, definitely. And it didn't really surprise me. And I think some of them really stepped up to the plate like we knew they had potential. And some of them just stole it. And they took every ounce of potential that they had, which was a great final game for their college football resume in NFL draft prospect goes. But let's, since we're talking about LSU, let's put the nail on the head in that game. You mentioned Justin Jefferson. My goodness, the guy was all over the field, 4 touchdowns, over 200 yards. And you were talking about Joe Burrow, some of his accuracy downfield's a little shaky. Justin Jefferson does not care. I think he loves to have those contested catches. He was plucking the ball out the air. He is a terror after the catch, and I think that's one of his really strong points when being compared. When you're going to have to find really minute details in this receiving class when you're ranking them and for scouting organizations to be like, hey, what can this guy do just maybe slightly better than this guy, and we can get better value for him. Justin Jefferson's yards after the catch and just ability to win those physical contests and be a really threat in the end zone or in the red zone, I think are 3 parts of his game that are really going to get him that nod. But he was incredible. Definitely helped Joe Burrow out in that game. K'Lavon Chaisson, the defensive end / outside linebacker for LSU, I thought he was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
He showed out in big games this year against Florida and Alabama. This game, he had six tackles, 2 sacks. 2 tackles were lost with those sacks, 13.5 on the year. Showed a lot of quickness in the upper body. And that's something I really like to see, especially in pass rushers and, of course, offensive linemen, is how they improve their upper body from the first week to the end of the season. Eder Gross-Matos, the Penn State defensive end, he is a guy that I've talked about that has moved up in my draft board in my top 15. He's a guy that struggled a little bit finding just a rhythm or some kind of consistent pass rush elements in his upper body. He checked the boxes this year. I think K'Lavon Chaisson is slowly doing that too. I still think he's raw on a little bit in some areas as far as just overall technique goes, but he showed a lot of upper body quickness, a lot of lower body quickness, ability to win in the phone booth, not just with power, but quick movements. He was constantly getting in Jalen Hurts' face. And I think K'Lavon Chaisson is definitely one of the more intriguing prospects in this class because you just see the potential. I feel like there's a little bit of Marcus Davenport. I feel like you've said that before. I think it was about him, but it may have been about somebody else. But the athleticism and the potential is there. And I think you're going to see him, test very well if he does declare for the draft. And I think he could be that borderline first-round guy.
Absolutely. And I think right now he's a guy in Chaisson. Is it Chaisson or Chaisson? Chaisson?
Chaisson, same thing. That's probably not even right. There's probably that's how the LSU media guide and ESPN will say it, but there's probably some French way to say it in Baton Rouge terms, but we're going to go with K'Lavon Chaisson.
He's interesting. And I think he could potentially be a climber almost like Brian Burns. And the only difference with him is I don't think there's really any concerns with playing weight. Maybe that will come out or something, but I don't think so. And he kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Brian Burns in a way. So I'm excited to see what he can do. But moving forward, Senior Bowl stuff that has come out from some recent accepted invites. Courtney Davis out of Texas A&M recently accepted his invite, and you try to stay up to date, but there are so many freaking names on the Senior Bowl accepted invites here. It's like I can't even remember where did we leave off, who do we have where. I'm just all over the place on these guys because there's so many guys that I like. And like a recent guy I watched was Josh Jones, offensive tackle out of Houston, a guy that you're a fan of. And I recently watched him.
To an extent. I'm a fan of to an extent.
Yeah, no, for sure. And he's a guy that I'm a fan of. Anthony Jennings out of Alabama. I think he's going to have a fantastic week at the Senior Bowl if he goes. I'm assuming he will, but I think he's just explosive. I think he's really going to step up. I think he's going to stand out. Jawan Jennings, wide receiver out of Tennessee. He recently accepted. I think he's a physical player. I think the body build for him is I think he's thick. I think teams are going to like that. I think he's just got great effort. I think he's a player that could play out of the slot. I think he could play on the outside as an X receiver. You've got, oh my gosh, there's so many names. Guys like, Tylan Wallace, though. We thought maybe there's a chance that he could go pro. He's going back to school, rightfully so. And I thought you made some really good points in the pre-show as we talked about that. What was your take on him going back to school?
Yeah, he's just battled injuries this year, and with a really loaded wide receiver class that we talk about every week on this podcast, on Twitter, wherever it may be, makes a lot of sense because Tylan Wallace has a lot of top 50 type ability, and I think he would get lost in the mix in this really stacked wide receiver class, which there probably is 8 to 10 guys that are going to grade out in the top 50 or top 55, 60. And I don't know if he would be one of them if he were to declare in this class, but he shows a lot of ability after the catch. He has a lot of wiggle in his route running abilities, finds plenty of ways to get separation. So I think with him being a headliner going into next season, I think this is the right decision. And for him to put together, 12 healthy games, 13 healthy games, and really check that box off and be like, hey, don't worry about the injury history. I'm good to go.
For sure. And I mean, I guess for the Senior Bowl side of things, the quarterbacks, we had a big name step into the mix while we were away from the show. Jordan Love out of Utah State. He's decided to enter his name into the mix at the Senior Bowl, and I think that's a big thing to really pay attention to because I think he could have a great week that could justify himself as maybe a back-end first-round pick. And we've talked about him quite a few times. I don't think he's going to go that early. I know that's really rich for probably some people because he is probably realistically a day 2 pick, but the upside is what's going to draw teams to him. And if a guy like Tua goes back to Alabama, then I think that's going to be something that benefits guys like Jordan Love because I think he could jump a player like Jake Fromm, and he might even jump a guy like Jacob Eason or Justin Herbert in the quarterback discussion, specifically Herbert, because Herbert's not really getting any better. He's not getting worse, but he's not getting better. He's the same guy, and it's like, well, what are we getting out of this guy? Because I think that's something that's going to alarm some people. Have I missed anybody on the Senior Bowl list? Obviously there's a ton of names that we haven't talked about, but is there a guy that maybe you are really looking at that is going to turn a lot of heads at the Senior Bowl? I have another name, but I'll let you answer the question.
I am glad, though, that you did bring up Jawan Jennings out of Tennessee because he's had a really interesting past. He was dismissed from Tennessee, came back, worked his way to get back on the team, and then in his last game, he stepped on some Vanderbilt player's head without a helmet on because of just some extracurricular activities and stuff. So I feel like the Senior Bowl is an event for guys like that are going to get drilled with interview questions, but also have some questions on the field too. Jennings, like you said, big body type physical receiver. What's his role at the next level? Is he going to be an outside guy or just a situational guy in the red zone or on third and short passing downs, whatever it may be? I think his ability in those one-on-one drills to be able to separate, not necessarily just with physical ability, but just, with some quickness in his releases or what he can do at the top of his break, I think is really important. KJ Hill's a guy, Brad Kelly just wrote about him. Really good article talking about how his growth and his route running ability, especially pushing the vertical elements of his game, is going to make his ability to transition to the NFL very seamless. And so I think KJ Hill, it's kind of a poor man's comparison in a sense, but just based on the situation that he was in, like Terry McLaurin had a lot of I don't say hype, but potential coming into the Senior Bowl. Everybody knew who he was, but he showed out, and we saw what he did for Washington this year. KJ Hill kind of has that too. Set a lot of records at Ohio State. He's going to come in here very well known, but I think some of his physical ability is still unknown in the sense where what can he do at the next level? I think he answers that. I like these receivers that are in Mobile.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, Brian Edwards, you got Devin Duvernay, just two other guys as well that I think are going to have a great camp at the Senior Bowl. Edwards, because of his physicality, what he can do, just whether it's high pointing or what he does at the catch point in itself. I mean, I think he is just a big body receiver that teams are going to really fall in love with. And then you got a guy like Duvernay who is maybe going to be the best route runner there. It's going to be a lot of fun. But the name that I was going to say was Neville Gallimore out of Oklahoma. Yeah. His motor is – I have fallen in love with this kid. His motor just does not stop. And when you put on the tape from start to finish, it just goes. And I don't want to say he's a top 20 or top 25 pick, but I think teams in the back end of the first round are going to fall in love with him, and they're going to realize on the second turn they're not going to get a chance to draft him because he's going to go early day 2. And I think he's a guy that is going to climb after this weekend or after that week of the Senior Bowl. I think he's going to be great. But the guy that really stood out when I saw the invite accepted, Christian Fulton, a guy that you recently wrote about, and I am really curious on your take on this. I mean, maybe we won't even see him. Maybe he'll back out. I mean, there's so much still left to do in the next 3 to 4 weeks, but he has an invite. He accepted the invite, and we'll see what happens after the national championship game. Maybe just he needs to take a break and rest up for the combine and everything else, but he's a senior corner. I know the off the field stuff, 2017, he had the red flag with the drug test where he failed and he had to sit out an entire year. What's your take on Fulton, especially with Jeff Okudah? Many people believe is the top corner, maybe a top 5 pick, and maybe a top 5 player in the draft. And Jeff Okudah out of Ohio State, he's declared for the draft. So how important is the Senior Bowl, obviously, for a guy like Christian Fulton who's competing for that top cornerback spot?
Yeah, I don't want to say it's not important, but I don't think it's as vital as maybe
Right.
we'll make it out to be. I think it sounds like Okudah is going to be that CB1 regardless. That's kind of what I've gathered. When you have kind of that young blossoming corner that has a lot of potential, that showed a lot of ability, especially on a national level, I think it's kind of hard to pass it up for a guy with some red flags in the background, even though he has, cleaned those up and he is a senior, he's older. I'm just giving all the reasons against Fulton, but I think he's a strong candidate for CB2. But on the field, I think you could say he's a lot of abilities, could be that top corner in the class. He has tremendous mirroring ability. He can beat you physically at the press point. He can beat you downfield. It's a really good job of getting his head around, pretty much stays clean of penalties. So I think his game on the field is remarkably good. I mean, I think he was better than Greedy Williams a year ago. He's been one of the cleaner cornerback prospects from LSU in recent memories. But I definitely think Fulton is a guy that may not necessarily show much growth in that regard if he goes to the Senior Bowl. Maybe kind of Derek Brown's situation, even though I know Derek Brown's not competing for DT1. He has that all but locked up by now. But I think Fulton can sit back and still be a top 15 selection because I still think there's a lot of guys that are going to get picked before him just based on positional value and not necessarily because he didn't play well or didn't play at the Senior Bowl.
That's true. And I mean, I think like the Senior Bowl is so important for guys like that we've already talked about, like the Brian Edwards and the Devin Duvernay and things like that, and the KJ Hills of the world. Yeah. But with Okudah and Fulton, I think, and this is one of those things for me where it's still so close. And I don't know why. Maybe I mean, I do know why. I have the notes in front of me, and I'm going to go in on it. But, I mean, like Jeff Okudah for me, I just don't see a top 5 player. And that's just what my eyes see. That's what my gut's telling me. And I texted you this, and I tweeted it out. He reminds me of Darius Slay. Now, Darius Slay is a very talented player. But Darius Slay is not Big Play Slay. He is not – I don't know why that nickname is there. It's there. But – I watch that team every Sunday, and I watch that team over on Game Pass a few hours afterwards or on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, whenever the All-22 comes out, and I rewatch. He's good, but he does get caught trailing. And I think that's where there's that separation between him and a receiver that consistently happens. And guys like Demaryius Thomas beat his ass when they played him. They beat up on him, and that's because maybe there is a size differential or whatever it might be. But I think it's because guys like Darius Slay and Jeff Okudah, they're not as patient in man and zone coverage. Now, Okudah, when he's in man, he's pretty damn good. He thrives. He's good. But for me, Christian Fulton, that patient, that fluidity, the closing speed, it's all there. And there are times he'll get caught on his heels here and there. But that physicality really stands out. And Okudah, I'm not saying he's not physical, but I just don't think he's as physical as Fulton, and I think his ability in zone coverage could get better. And I think there's times that he will overcommit to one area in his zone that causes this opening, whether it's underneath or over the top. Now, he does make up for it. He really does. But that patience is not there yet for him, and that's because he is still a young corner. He is a guy in just 1 year starter, and the tackling for him can improve. There were times in that game against Clemson he missed tackles, and it was very evident late in the game. He missed those tackles that kind of cost him the game. So I think it's a lot closer than people are making it out to be. And I'm not saying you or anybody else, but the top 3 talk, the top 5 talk, if he's not top 5 on your board, that's fine. If that's what you want it to be, that's fine. But I think it's more so these guys are like between 9, 12, and 13, or, like 10, 11, 12, 10, 11, 12, 13. They're more in that range for me. And maybe I'm just not good with defensive backs. Maybe I just struggle there, but that's just where I am. I'm glad Okudah went pro. I think he made the right decision. But people are saying, like, hey, the Lions at 3 should really consider Jeff Okudah. And I'm sorry, those people that say that do not watch the Detroit Lions and do not pay attention to the history of this franchise and what direction they go when drafting players. They have not drafted a cornerback since 1997 or 1998 with Terry Fair. And I don't believe that they're going to change that anytime soon. And I don't think they're going to change it with the 3rd overall pick with Jeff Okudah when there's a guy like Derek Brown on the board, a guy like Andrew Thomas on the board, when those 2 guys are going to be there, because the Lions go with the trenches before they do anything else. And the defensive tackle position and their left tackle position are going to be more impactful and more important to their draft evaluation than Jeff Okudah or any other defensive back in the 1st round, simply because Damon Harrison could retire. He's talked about it. And Taylor Decker, contract year, does not have a new contract. They could be looking for a new franchise left tackle. So I think that those are the 2 players that they're going to consider. And they also follow in the SEC trend that they tend to do, because I believe in the last 3 or 4 years with Bob Quinn, they've drafted 18 or 19 players out of the SEC or something like that, 15 players. It's something ridiculous. I have a tweet about it, but I can't remember when I said it or what the exact number is. But either way, I'm rambling on about the Lions when I should be talking more about Fulton and Okudah. Both players are great. Both players have their flaws, and I think the flaws for them outweigh the flaws of other guys, which is what pushes them down the board for me. And I think we'll get obviously more into it down the road. But that, I think, was probably the bigger news of anything that we've really talked about, was Jeff Okudah going pro, and then obviously Christian Fulton going to the Senior Bowl. Potentially, could we see that? And then obviously, how does he match up, which we'll preview next week? How does he match up against a guy like T. Higgins? And that's going to be a physical effing matchup, and I cannot wait to watch it. I'm being honest. I can't wait to watch that one. But I do have one last question, and that is with Tua. He's set it out on Twitter. He's going to give his decision January 6th on Monday. We don't know the exact time. Maybe he did give a time. I didn't see one. But what do you think he's going to do? There's been the rumblings of going back to Alabama. So do you think that's what he does?
It's strange because it's strange because why would you set your date if you're just gonna I feel like, I don't know, I feel like if you're gonna set the stage, and I feel like the bigger news would be, hey, I'm returning for another year in Tuscaloosa. Oh, I'm gonna go to the draft. let me say that on Twitter. It's not like you have to have a big press conference. Though the type of person he is, he's a very humble person, very family-oriented, which that goes to the Tagovailoa family and the University of Alabama family with his football team and coaches. So maybe he just thinks he needs to respect them in a way of having a press conference or some kind of ceremony where he'd be like, hey, I enjoyed my time here. I'm going to miss you all a bunch, but I am going to go pro. But it could be the complete opposite. I still lean more towards that he's going pro because it makes the most sense, in my opinion. I don't know the ins and outs of what he's going through right now and what the thoughts are, what he's contemplating really. But I think everything that aligns for his future would be him going to the NFL right now. He owes Alabama college football nothing more. He's given them every bit of his ability in his body, pun intended. And I think he's done enough there to still stay in that first-round conversation despite the injury. But it sounds like he's progressing very good as far as his injury progress goes with his hip. So I think all the signs still point that he's going to go to the league just based on his future. But it is kind of interesting that all this chatter in the past few days has kind of turned into, hey, he's going to announce January 6th. So it's interesting. I still think he goes pro, but I'm not as confident as I was maybe a week or so ago.
I really don't know. It's bad for podcasts and radio, in my opinion, to sit on the fence, and I stand by that. But I really don't know because, I understand what you're saying from the aspect of, why go back? You don't owe Alabama or the NCAA anything, which is rightfully so and true. But at the same time, he could make a bigger payday. And I think that's something that, look at Kyler Murray. He was going to get 8 or 9 million guaranteed from the Oakland A's. He signed the contract, and that was just to play baseball, and he bet on himself and went with football and went with something he was probably more passionate about, absolutely, and something that he's probably better at. And that transferred from, $8 to $9 million to $30-35 million. And I think right now, if he was to go top 5 or top 10, he would get like $17 or $18 million. When if he goes back and he figures it out and proves that he's the top player, which is a big gamble because you got Justin Fields, you've got Trevor Lawrence, and I'm sorry, I'm probably going to take one of those two guys over Tua. I'm sorry. Just with the health and everything else, I'm going to take one of those two guys. And I feel like an NFL franchise would feel the same way, but he could go from making $18 to $19 million to $30-35 million. So I think that's really what it boils down to from that aspect, and it could be about money, but I guess that I'm thinking about it, I'm with you in the sense of I think he probably will announce that he's leaving, he's going pro, and that's it. And I hope he does because I really don't want to see him get a career-threatening injury next year or something because at this point I don't want to see him get hurt again. I mean, there's a pretty good chance he's going to hurt his lower body again when he gets to the next level. We've said that time and time again, but I don't want to see it at the NCAA level. So we'll see how it goes down on January 6th. Obviously, you guys can refresh the Twitter button, but you guys need to smash the follow button with us. Look at that segue. And that is with us at Russ NFL Draft, at _Christian Page. Obviously, give us a follow at cover_1_ as well. And be sure to subscribe, rate, review this podcast on Apple Podcast. You can search it, Cover One Draft Podcast. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Spreaker.com. And you can also find us on cover1.net or download the Cover One app for absolutely free, and you'll have the podcast at the palm of your hand with your mobile device. So, CP, I don't have anything else for you. I hope you have a great weekend, and we will talk next week. For everybody else, do what I told you to do. Smash the follow button. Find us on the podcast app and everything else. So until next time, this is Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast.